Hello bitches, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to finally tell y'all the secrets to making my comics on Instagram. So if you're not already following me on Instagram, it's mewtripled at Instagram. So anyway, before I get straight to the process of making my comics, let me tell you what you need. First of all, you need to have some sort of device. I have an iPad Pro, the 12.9 inch from 2017. And I have sketchbooks. And in addition to that, I also have my phone. So these are the main things I really use to make my comics and then post them on Instagram. And also I have a tutorial on my Etsy store as well that kind of talks more deeply about how I make my comics on Instagram. In addition to that, there is a speed paint with me just talking about my process. So if you want a more in-depth video, I have one on my Etsy store for any of you who want to get more information about that. So check it out, and thank you again for your support. So one of the first things you have to decide before you even put your comics online is to decide where to put your comics online, or if you want to publish it or what, because for me, I had to figure out what platform worked best for my comics, and it was ultimately Instagram. The reason why is because currently Instagram is one of the more major platforms which has a lot more people on it, therefore you're more likely to gain an audience there. And in addition to that, they have a 10 photo limit for their posts, so you can put up to 10 images, but within those 10 pictures you can have several panels of your comic, which means you can probably have like a lot more panels than if I were to put them on Twitter, which only allows 4 pictures per post, which for me was very limiting for the types of stories I like to tell, because for me personally, my comics are more storyboard driven. They utilize a lot of the skills I feel I learned from animation and stuff like that. So for me, I really think about pacing, or I think about character reactions rather than just having very quick images just slapped next to each other. Not saying that there's anything wrong with that. It's just my style of comics is more similar to just storyboarding for films and animation. So after you decide what platform is going to be best for your comics, I think that it would be very smart of you to start writing down the list of comics you actually want to make. Whether if it's on your phone, or if it's going to be in your iPad or your sketchbook or whatever, just write down your goddamn ideas, because
we are humans and we are prone to failure and forgetfulness, and we are going to forget the shit that we're going to tell ourselves that we want to remember on Monday, but then come Friday you're just like, god damn it.
So write down your ideas, because even though you think you're going to remember it, you are prone to forgetting things, and you might as well make it a habit so that during a moment in time that you're just like, I want to make a comic, but I don't have an idea. It's so much easier to just pull up an idea from the list on your phone or in your sketchbook rather than just sitting there and trying to force an idea out in that moment. But that's also not to say to ignore the spontaneous ideas that do come to you, because there are moments like that, you know, spontaneous ideas are great, but for the most part, if you want to continuously, constantly make comics on a more consistent basis, it would be easier for you to just make your life easier by doing a small, simple task of writing down your ideas. So after you wrote down your list of ideas and you decided upon an idea that you want to make a comic about today, that is when you can start writing, thumbnailing, and just brainstorming the comic. And normally whenever I brainstorm my comic or write my comics, as you all know, I allow myself to just let it be as ugly as possible. Not saying that I just purposefully make it ugly or anything, but I just let my mind do its thing and keep going just to get the idea out of my brain, rather than just sitting there and trying to make a perfect picture for a thumbnail that the world is not even going to see. So it's better to just start brainstorming the words, the dialogue, the exposition of the story or whatever it is, and just putting down at least blobs of placements of where the characters are going to be in each panel and just marking down their emotions. So yeah, don't take this step too seriously and make a beautiful illustration over something that should be a behind the scenes. So yeah, just let the idea come out of your brain and use it more as a guide for when you complete your actual comic that you will post, which is probably going to be done digitally, unless if you want to do it traditionally and use pen and ink or watercolor or whatever. It's really up to you to decide what medium you want to use. So after I thumbnail my comics and write down the dialogue, the next thing I do is just pretty much go straight into my iPad. So again, I use the iPad 12.9 inch from 2017. I got the iPad again just simply because I am someone who does not enjoy being tied down to my desk when I work on stuff. I like having flexibility and mobility. I love drawing in cafes. I love drawing on my couch. I love drawing anywhere but being glued to a desk. And that is when I feel like my best ideas come out, is whenever I'm just somewhere else, just listening to music and on my iPad. And that is why I feel like using an iPad has been so much more beneficial for me than using a Cintiq. And for me personally, I just would rather make my comics on my iPad instead of my Cintiq, because my iPad still gives me that sense of looseness where I'm just like, it's okay if the lines aren't perfect. It's okay if the coloring is not in the lines, just simply because on the iPad you still don't really have as much full control as you would on a Cintiq. But I think for me, it allows me to be more loose and expressive with my work. So when I line art my comics are really just line art that's half sketch, half line art, where it's not fully like completed line art, but it's not as messy as a sketch. The reason why is because, again, you want to make your comics sustainable for yourself. You don't want to make this a miserable process for yourself where every time you have to work on your comic, you just have to think about the curvature of this line, or you don't want to think about the
crispness of this line,
or whatever the fuck this fucking line is supposed to. Like, doing the line art for your comic should not drive you crazy, and that is something that I've definitely decided to be more loose about. And that is why I've kind of stopped making sketches before I do my line art, and I just go straight into the line art. Because what I find is, for me personally, whenever I have a sketch beneath my line art, I have more of an obligation, or I feel more obligated to make my line art fit the exact feeling I made during the sketch, because I find that whenever I make sketches, they are more expressive than the line art itself. So that's why now I'm just like, you know what, I'm just gonna dive right in, do the line art and make it sketchy, and if it does get a little bit too messy, I'm just gonna erase the parts that I messed up, because I feel like it's just too much time to worry about the line art of your comics. Unless if this is something that you really want to do, then yeah, go ahead. But for me, I just want to really be able to get my stories out on a more consistent basis. So then after I line art all my comics is when I pretty much just go in and slap in some color. And for me, I personally just choose to work in monotone colors, because fun fact about me, my least favorite part of making art is actual coloring. Like, most people would think like, oh, art is all about colors and watercolors and pretty colors and whatnot, and I love colors, don't get me wrong. I love the idea of having colors in my work, but the thing that I just hate is doing the coloring, just because it's something that I feel like is more mindless work, and that is good when it comes to just wanting to relax and just chill. So I think coloring is great for when I just want to, you know, listen to a video or just watch something and I can just color while I do it. But for me, the thing that invigorates me about art, or the thing that makes me more interested in the things that I do, is just when I'm like, ooh, I'm going to convey this expression, or I'm going to give this drawing a purpose with its, you know, the characters doing something. And that's the thing that makes me want to draw it, is because I'm like, oh my god, she's feeling angry, I better make her eyebrows as crunched as possible. So yeah, that's just my favorite part of the process. I'm more of a drawer than a colorer, but I don't hate coloring. It's just my least favorite part of the process, because for me, I'm just like, okay, I already made the comic. I don't really want to color it and look through it again. So after I draw all the panels for my comic is when I would then go into Photoshop and start formatting them, especially if my comic is longer than 10 panels. And most of the time they are. So when I do my comics, I just pretty much do every panel as its own individual image first, and then I will go into Photoshop and then organize the panels in the way that I think the pacing would be right. So, you know, sometimes if I like one panel just standing by itself, I will make sure I give it its own page. Whereas some things that are more expositional, like, oh, Mish is getting up and she's going to the bathroom or she's going out, like, I think that could just all be clumped into 3 to 4 panels on one page. I don't need to give them each their own page because she's just getting up and leaving. So yeah, I like to save the big singular panels for more important moments, and I like to clump several panels onto one page if I feel like it's just more expositional. So after I finish my comic, I then post it on Patreon first because that is where I allow early access to my comics. So thank you for all my patrons for making this possible for me, because currently I do not get paid to make my own comics. And in addition to that, usually on Patreon is where I kind of start brainstorming the caption for my comics, because what I noticed is that a lot of people really enjoy the captions, and so do I, because I feel like my comics for me are ultimately like a little therapy session, like a little moment for me to just revisit some of my childhood trauma and then, you know, reevaluate and reflect on it as an adult and all of that shit. So that is where I like to just think about where this comic originated from, why I made this comic, or the feeling that inspired this comic, just because I feel like, you know, as an artist that is there and I can still provide myself personally to my audience, I would still like to be able to communicate, you know, the personal sides of what inspired this comic while I still can. So I normally do all the brainstorming for writing it on Patreon, and sometimes it changes, but ultimately Patreon is kind of where I post everything first, and then afterwards I will post them on Instagram. So schedule-wise, I mostly post my comics right now every Wednesday on Instagram. I try to make it, you know, a weekly thing to just post a comic a week, and, you know, if things get busier, I might post a comic every other week, just because I feel like, again, at the end of the day, my comics are just more of a hobby and not really my main job. It's just the thing I do to maintain my own voice while I am still working in the industry, working on someone else's voice and learning from them. So I feel like my comics are kind of like my homework. It's like where I come back and take all the things I learned from school, aka my job, and then apply it to my own personal work, just so I can have something I genuinely enjoy doing while still learning. And for those of you who want to eventually make your own books, one of the first things I did in order to self-publish my own books was to use Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing, and that is where I eventually turn my comics into a book. It's really fascinating to just see how my comics once started off as just these scribbles on post-its, and then they ended up into a physical book. And although it is self-published, I think it is very rewarding to just see a physical version of your comics just on an actual page. I think self-publishing is such a great way to empower independent artists to making their own shit and to just have a tangible version of everything that they've made and posted online. So that is what I use, Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing, for any of you who want to eventually transform your comics into something physical. Anyway, I hope this video better informed some of y'all about my process with making comics, especially because when I first started making comics on Instagram, there weren't really any artists just talking about how they do it. Not that it's really that hard to grasp how they do it. It's just one of those things that's just like, I just like learning about other people's workflows, and this is my workflow. So I hope this video inspired some of y'all, and if you ever want to check out my comics, they're on Instagram, and if you want to check out the one tutorial I made about a greater in-depth version of how I make my comics, it's on Etsy, and if you want to get early access to my comics, they're on Patreon. So thank you all again for your support, because one of the reasons why I can still keep making comics is just because whenever I hear about how y'all relate to the stories I tell, that's something that just really emotionally invigorates me to keep creating more comics. It's just know that my stories, which are really just my personal things from life, can reach out to people like you. So yeah, thank you for being a true hoe to me, and I hope that y'all start making some great comics telling about your lives and start doing the same for other bitches out there. So thank you again for watching this video, and I'll see y'all in the next one. So stay wholesome, bitches.